really didn't know what kind of reception Black River was going to have. It's noir fiction. I tend to follow my feet a lot and I tend to follow my heart a lot. And this book was born out of multiple levels of curiosity. Journalists, our job is to report the story and move on. I don't think I ever decide. If I did, my literary career would probably, be less fitful. I've gone off and followed my curiosity from food writing to fantasy fiction to several anthologies on the past, on the freedom struggle and all of that. I am drawn to ambiguity where humans are concerned. I think even our heroes, have a grimmer side to them. Sacred Games, for example, is that the transition from novel to the screen can be very satisfying.
Hello and welcome to News 18 Showsha. I am Shreeja Bhattacharya and today I'm joined by an erstwhile journalist and author, Nilanjana Roy. Thank you so much for joining us, Nilanjana. And congratulations on the fact that your book, Black River, is doing so well. How do you feel?
Stunned, actually. And thank you so much for making the time to have me on the show, especially at the start of the new year. I really didn't know what kind of reception Black River was going to have. It's noir fiction. It's set in Delhi, but on the outskirts of Delhi. And it's a thriller, but it wanders into literary fiction territory. And it doesn't really seem to be bothered about who done it. It's much more for why done it. And I think I've been taken aback by the kindness of the response, of the fact that a lot of readers seem to get the world of these three migrants from, just outside the city of Bengal, who become friends on the banks of the Black River. And then later in life, 20 years down the line, one of them faces a terrible tragedy. And
Right.
people, it's a world that's disconnected from us, but people seem to have responded to it with extreme generosity. So I understand.
And what prompted you to write this book? Is it a work of, complete nonfiction, or did you sort of seek inspiration from a real life incident?
That's an acute question. There
Mhm.
wasn't a single incident. But
Mhm.
some years back, I tend to follow my feet a lot and I tend to follow my heart a lot. And this book was born out of multiple levels of curiosity and a kind of heartbreak as well. This was many years ago. I finished writing my first couple of books, The Wildings and The Hundred Names of Darkness, around 2013.
Mhm.
And around 2009 to 2013, I was still working with the New York Times and writing on gender for other places. And I kept seeing these terrible absences, it was so casual, the offhand murders of women and young girls.
Mhm.
And that started to become a deep ache in my heart because I've said this before, but as journalists, our job is to report the story and move on. But what I was meeting were families or sometimes, survivors, relatives who were still in grief 10 years, 15 years after these things had happened. And there seemed to be nowhere to place that grief.
Mhm.
And the other side of it was a tremendous curiosity. I think at some point, I love walking around Delhi in winter and I love walking in general. And we think of this as a partition city, which it absolutely is. But the generation that also shaped it were migrants, And when
Right.
I was doing stories of homelessness or displacement, I started to understand that what I thought of was a very difficult life filled with hardships had its joyful side. And I don't mean that I don't mean to trivialize the difficulties migrants face. But there's a tremendous enthusiasm that builds around any big city. There's a promise, there's a set of dreams in the atmosphere. And people were generous again when they shared with me. So that's the level of nonfiction. There was no one particular incident. I think you're thinking of one of the murders in the book. And we can talk about that a little later, but there are several acts of violence in the book. And, some of them are invisible to us. There are actually two murders that the book starts with. And because the woman who's murdered, the adult woman, is somebody with a dubious past, we tend to overlook that and we tend to overlook the injustice of that. And we tend to look at what is the more sympathetic victim always. But I think that question hovered in the air for me. What do we do with the cases that don't make the headlines? that pain is still there. And I guess, there was just a hurt that came into this book, a kind of lasting grief and a search for answers. I'm sorry, that was long.
No, 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 no. The very title of the book, Black River, is very daunting in itself. And while we do understand that it's symbolic of the waters of Yamuna, what else does it symbolize? Is there a deeper meaning to it?
Again, I'm so glad you asked that because there's a couple of things I discovered after we titled the book and, after that came up. One
Mm-hmm.
is that there's a river apparently almost in every country or continent.
Mm-hmm.
So this phenomenon of a river that is often beloved, the Yamuna is a Himalayan river, and black is a bad translation of Savla or Kehri, deep river would be more accurate. But some of it is that in the depths of a river, you glimpse so much life. And Black River was a nod to that. It was not just to the darkness of the human heart, but
Mm-hmm.
it was the depth that grows in that darkness. And that was the meaning behind it.
Correct. So, you've previously written about fantasy fiction, and now you're moving to crime fiction. So, non-fiction actually. So that's a major shift in itself, like a huge one. Uh, how and when did you decide that you wanted to do this?
I don't think I ever decide. If I did, my literary career would probably, be less fitful. I've gone off and followed my curiosity from food writing to fantasy fiction to several anthologies on the past, on the freedom struggle and all of that. But I think I just love genre fiction. I admire literary fiction, and I read a lot of that as a reviewer and a critic. But I've always lived in the world of fantasy or the world of thrillers, of crime, noir fiction. That's meant a lot to me, whether it's written by Scandinavian writers, Indian writers, or the incredible set of Scottish writers, right?
Right.
And the challenge out there with Black River was I don't know whether I've got the clockwork right, but there's a lot of the mechanics of a crime novel that are fascinating, particularly how time plays out. You know, that's something that I just want to keep working at and keep learning about. But the other side of it is when you start with something like a murder, particularly a murder that leaves you shocked or in grief, you don't have to stay there. You can say so much, as Ian Rankin and others have discovered. You can say so much about the city, a time of change, about people's lives and friendships and their decisions about what constitutes justice behind the murder. And that to me is attractive. So, with fantasy, the lure was really freedom.
Mm-hmm.
It was so much fun dreaming up the wildings and dreaming up a city seen from the perspective of cats and stray dogs. And with crime fiction, though, I think I'm going to stay here for a while. It's a very challenging genre. And I certainly don't write as well as the best in it.
Mm-hmm.
But a genre that has an immediate appeal for us because it's timeless, the story of good and evil, and the many shades of gray, the ambiguity in between. I am drawn to ambiguity where humans are concerned. I think even our heroes, have a grimmer side to them or might do things that surprise you and take you aback, like Umbir and Chand in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Our villains are sometimes acting out of impulses that they can't control. They're at the mercy of something beyond themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And fiction gives you room to explore particularly crime. Also, come on, we live in India and look at the variety
Mm-hmm.
of, you can't make a lot of things up because reality keeps outpacing everything that you're trying to write about.
Correct. Going back to Black River, there's a lot that went into the book, a lot of research work. Do you think your journalistic background sort of helped, work through it?
It did. It helped and hindered
Mm-hmm.
uh, because, after all, you're not writing nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
I think it helped in the sense that I wanted to write Black River, whether it was the story of Khalid, Rabia, and Chand meeting in Delhi and not realizing that they were stumbling into a friendship that would last well over 30 years
Mm-hmm.
as the city changes around them. Or whether it was Umbir, a policeman whom I grew fond of, even if we don't always see eye to eye on many things. I think being a journalist helped me just explore further and make that reality a little more real. You're not daunted, even if you walk the Yamuna many, many times,
Mhm.
you know that you're walking it in the present moment. And that maybe you should go back to oral history, interviews, research to try and figure out what it is. So, that part of it, which might be challenging for a writer who's not used to the interview grind or looking at libraries and archives, is second nature to us. But there's a point where you have to let go of the security, the comfort zone that being a journalist brings you. And you have to allow yourself to step into the imagination. And there, I must confess, I think I'm still at the start of something. I am 50, so it's a little late to be starting. But you know what? Actually, no, it's not that late.
Yeah.
I think you can start something new
Mhm.
in your 60s, 70s, or 80s, or 20s. It doesn't matter. And I love the idea of starting out with the question of what does the imagination do? Where can it take us? That's new territory.
And we've often seen movies lending a lot from crime novels. Do you see that kind of future for Black River as well?
I would love to see it in a different form,
Mhm.
but I haven't actively looked for that. I'd be very curious about how it translated onto a screen. What we've seen with Sacred Games, for example, is that the transition from novel to the screen can be very satisfying. It's a different book. I'm looking forward to seeing Deepti Kapoor's Age of Vice now when that's I've read the book already and it's stunning. There's a reason why I think a whole generation of people from Deepanjana Pal to Tanuj Sarangi to Deepti Kapoor are turning towards the seamy side of Indian megacity. We're sensing that there's a larger story that can be told that way. And if it's picked up, you don't write to turn a book into a film. Why would you do that? Then you might as well just write this anyway.
Yeah.
But for any of us, it's very satisfying if somebody who has their own expertise and their own way of seeing a story takes something you breathe life into and give it, and if they can give it a fresh life, that's fantastic.
And you were also mentioning that crime itself, the crime genre, it's not very, it's a very difficult genre to write in. And we don't see a lot of Indian authors trying to meddle in it. So, as someone who is associated with the publishing house as well, how do you see it? Why are people so scared to explore this genre?
That's a good question, and I think this is only to do with English writing
Mhm.
because Bengali, Hindi for
Yeah.
sure, has a very very strong tradition of writing both excellent pulp fiction
Yeah.
and slightly more literary, crime and noir. In English, I think we are marked a little bit by obedience. So for a while, everyone was trying to write a Booker-winning novel,
Mhm.
and that's a bad thing to do to yourself. Not everyone. I'm being unfair here,
Mhm.
but I'm saying that it's difficult for writers not to be affected by trends, and crime is a little daunting. You can't technically sit back and imagine it. Massey, for example, writes historical crime brilliantly, you know. And Abir Mukherjee, again, in the UK, he's done a fair amount. Madhulika Little, she has a detective. Increasingly, you can see that strand of things going up. But crime requires you to really know what policing is about. And for me, I had an advantage. My mother's a lawyer, so many years ago, I went through a lot of the Indian crime database from the 1940s to the 1980s because there was a lawyer friend of hers who was trying to build a legal database. In fact, he did, and it became the forerunner of the Durex thing out here. And it was completely fascinating because part of the country is in love with strangling people they don't like. And some of the country will push people into wells. And around here, they like driving over people with tractors. That's where the fascination starts, right? And my job took me to places like morgues out in the boondog, which was so inadequately staffed, and where people were still, in their own way, trying to bring a little bit of consolation or a little bit of kindness to the families of the dead. Or hospitals that were hospitals of name only. Policing, again, my impression of the police was that they were so powerful, and they are, but they're also curiously vulnerable and often understaffed, or they don't have access to the fancy forensic lab abroad. And this became a little bit of a sticking point when we were showing Black River to publishers elsewhere outside of India. It is going to come out in the UK and elsewhere soon enough. But for publishers out there, it was confusing. Where is the forensic investigation? Can't you have a court case? And then you have to explain that a court case out here after a murder might take 15 years, you know? And somehow, the more those differences were pointed up, the more confident I grew, not just about myself, which is a very small thing, but I grew quite sure that people who are in some way in touch with the world of noir or crime, if you know property, for example, yeah, or if you're a lawyer who deals in some ways with criminal cases, you already have what you need to know to explore this. And sometimes it just takes two or three people to say, hey, this is what you can do. There's a reason why a literary author like Jerry Pinto, who's a marvelous translator, poet, a novelist, also turns to Bombay crime. We look at this and we see possibility. That's all. So I think there is going to be a little bit more of that because across the country, you can't get away from, I think, this question of justice. It does pursue us, doesn't it? There is so little justice. There is so much in the way of great damage. And one of the questions at the heart of Black River is not just about a specific crime. I think hanging in there was something that I kept seeing people grapple with. What is it that a community will tolerate? What do they want brushed under the carpet? What would they tell you to look away from? And what are the limits of justice? When you're grappling with that in the real world, it's very hard. You have your grief, as one of the characters in the book, John does. And that grief is a thing with great weight. It doesn't go in a day or a moment. And you also have this drive to contact the police, the courts, and then you come up against they can't do this much. Then what do you do?
Correct. And again, I'm going to ask you a question as a critique. So, in 2022, we saw a lot of Indian English writers coming through, and it was, they were all hailed so high. They were writing fantastic books. We have had some great books come out last year from Indian English writers. Do you see that kind of a graph this year as well? Are you going to see a similar kind of graph?
When I look at the writers whom I know and don't know, and a lot of them are in their 20s, or 30s, starting out, I think we've never stopped writing. In the past, we've had writers like Amitav Bagchi or Anis Saneem. Janice Bariat has been writing all along and doing, absolutely brilliant, unique one-off novels. But you're right to sense that there is a moment because what's happening now seems to be happening across genres in English. And last 10 years, maybe the diaspora writers who are spread out all over the world have, been more visible. But out here, there's a confidence in the homegrown literary scene, if that makes sense. We're no longer looking to my novel must be published in the West. For someone like me, it's much more important. I keep hoping that Black River will be translated not just into Hindi, but into multiple Indian languages, and we've only just started that process. We are writing for ourselves. And it's taken something like 3 centuries of trying at this to get here. But you're definitely seeing a moment that's got a tremendous amount of energy to it across writers from their 20s to writers in their 60s. Don't you see it? Don't you feel it? There's a new confidence whether it comes to genre or not. And whether people are reaching out on Instagram on lit fests or sitting quietly in their own houses just doing the work, there's a belief that we have readers here.
Correct.
That is what has really changed.
And lastly, before we conclude, what lies ahead of you? Will you, continue writing crime novels? What's there next in life?
Oh, I absolutely want to lead a life in crime. It's so satisfying. But the next novel, absolutely, it's realist again. And it is set in, let's say, 2 years ahead of Black River, which was set in 2017. And the only thing I know about it for sure now is that it's going to explore, why evil is so beguiling and why evil has such a strong pull, even why people defend uh, persons who are sometimes absolutely monstrous who do monstrous things. And after that, I don't know. I think I'm intrigued by the possibilities of more fiction, but I know that I do want to build a life in fiction. I've spent a lot of time as a columnist and an editor, and it's been an extremely rewarding life, the whole business of reading. The rewards are never just financial. I don't think I make a great deal of money as a writer. It's never bothered me per se. If I wanted to make money, I'd have become a bank manager or a corporate
Mhm.
person. But I cannot imagine building a life with this much joy in it and with this much discovery in it and this much creativity in it. And I just look ahead and I want to spend the 50s and hopefully the 60s continuing to produce novels across all genres, starting with but not ending with.
Well, looking forward to reading more from you, and thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Shreeja. Wonderful questions and such a pleasure to spend some time with you.
Thank you so much.